Hey everybody, this is Brett Ingram, and this is the optYOUmize podcast, the show that helps entrepreneurs build their dream business and dream life. Today we're talking with Deborah Heiser, an applied developmental psychologist specializing in midlife and aging, a TEDx speaker, consultant, author, and founder of the Mentor Project. I'm super excited about this because I think aging is such a universal and important topic. So with that, welcome Deborah, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be on your show.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. I think you have a fascinating background. So I actually wanted to start with that. So just from a background perspective, how did you get your start in your career, and what led you to doing what you do now?
So it was definitely not a straight line. I went into the field of psychology because I used to go to visit my grandma in Florida. I lived in New York and I would travel down to Florida, and one visit she wasn't herself. And, she was the fun grandma that you didn't have to pack any clothes. You would just wear hers. You only needed shoes, like super fun. And she just wasn't fun. She was grouchy. She was completely irritable. And I went to the assisted living person that worked there, and I said, "What's wrong with grandma?" And they said, "Don't worry, we're going to fix her. She's depressed." And I was like, "What? What's that?" And on my next visit down, they had fixed her. She was not depressed anymore. She was back to being herself. And they said, that happens on occasion. It was a med related thing. And so she was back to herself. So I said, "That's it. I want to fix grandmas." And so I went into psychology and wanted to focus on aging. But I thought that everything to do with aging had to be horrible, like everything no one ever wants to get or have. So that was my first step into it, was to become a researcher looking at depression and frailty, end of life, all the things that scare us and make for a terrible person to run into at a cocktail party. When they ask what you do, they ran away from me. It was terrible. So at one dinner, I was so excited to tell them all about the work I was doing and my book that came out about end of life care. And, as most would realize, that was a terrible thing. I was not a hit. And somebody said to me, "Hey, all you do is put a band-aid on the terrible things that we have to look forward to. Can you tell me one thing we have to look forward to as we grow older?" And I couldn't tell him anything. So I was like horrified. And I left and I said, "That's it. I have to figure out what it is that we all look forward to in life." And I made a pivot to look not at our physical trajectory, but our emotional trajectory, and found out, wow, we have so much. We can expect to be happier as we get older. We can expect all kinds of amazing things that I never realized when I was studying depression and all the other physical age related things like frailty and dementia and things like that, that we also may have to look forward to, but they are not on our normal developmental trajectory. So do not expect those things in your life. And so that's really how I landed here, was by that sort of squiggly line.
It's amazing though how, it's almost like a chance encounter in a sense that ends up having you then go look for another way. And so many stories in life work that way. I find it fascinating that, we're doing something and then somebody else makes us reflect on what we're doing, and we look at it in a different way and say, well, wait a minute, maybe there's a different way to do this, or maybe there's a different way to look at it. And I think, what you do is so important, because I do think, particularly in the United States, I don't think it's like this in every country, but I think for some reason there tends to be sort of a negative thought and idea of aging, and some cultures don't view it that way. They see it as you get wiser, you get smarter, and your value increases as you get older instead of decrease. And yet sometimes you feel like, at least in the United States, there's such a premium on youth that we get to a point where oh no, nobody wants to get old or nobody wants to age because because of that. So let's talk about the loaded question about aging. I mean, as I'm like hinting around at it, do you think there's an age-related bias in business and in society?
Oh, for sure. I teach a class on prejudice, and the big prejudice that we all have is of our future selves. I give an implicit test to everyone in the beginning of the semester, and they all are biased against themselves, their future selves. And that is about aging. And the age that they start to say that they're old is 30. It's really kind of young. And that has been since I was in my 30s and I first started teaching. And people would say, "You're old." And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm like 10 years older than you probably. Like, what is going on? But yes, that is exists, and it exists in the opposite direction too, where older adults, and by older I mean like pretty young, 40 and older, start to think that the younger generations, they're biased in that direction as well, where you'll hear like lazy or other things that just aren't true, but there's a bias in that direction as well. So age is one of those things that is just a hot mess of bias.
It is fascinating to me, but I'm glad you brought up the other side of it too. So my wife is actually a high school teacher. So it's funny because when she started, she was closer to the age of the students. And now, you become the age of the parents,
Yep.
and so it is funny though how you see sort of that evolution and just the way that you look at them. And to your point about people thinking, and I mean, I'll say it about my own kids, so I'm guilty of it. You guys just don't know how good you've got it. But, but I mean, I see such a broad range because she has so many students that you can see the kids that have so much on the ball. You can see the kids that are movers, shakers, that are giving, that are all the things that they're stereotyped
Yeah.
against. They're not those, and so I don't think we should as a people put people in boxes, but we have a tendency to want to do that anyway. And I think same thing when you get older, right? I mean, there are some people that when you get older, they definitely get richer and have more experience and all that other stuff with age. And then some people don't age as well. And so it can be a challenge. I mean, for sure. I know one of the things my wife and I like to watch Survivor and the reality show. And there's always a bias against the people that are old because if you're out on the island and you're like, oh, this person's like 45 or 50, they're not going to be able to do anything. And the funny thing is, sometimes they end up being one of the more productive people of the tribe. Sometimes they're even physically not as bad as people originally thought. And certainly the wisdom they've got for how to, brook disappointment and work through hardship and manage your mental state when you're in a state of depravity and you can't you're used to always having everything that you need and all of a sudden you don't anymore. Now, wow, it's a totally different scenario. So that said, what can we look forward to as we
We
age?
have so much to look forward to. And first of all, you can expect to be happier. End of story. I always tell the students that are, 18 to 21, you can run faster than me, but I'm happier than you. And that's really what we can expect, is that we're going to trade off some of the physical things in life with things like fulfillment, happiness, a feeling of accomplishment, a feeling of productivity, relevance, that we matter. All of these things are things that we can expect. And, people who have kids, when little kids are just running around and somebody says, oh, what do you hope for your kids that they'll become when they grow older? And parents generally say, I want them to be happy. And then that switches and
Yeah.
they say, no, no, here, check all these boxes in your life. You have to do X, Y, Z. But really, we just want to be happy and for our children to be happy. And really, we should expect that. As we age, we should expect to get happier and happier and happier. And research shows that that's one of the biggest things that we can look forward to. And that comes from all the connections that we make. It comes from the fact that, once when you're young, you're supposed to be figuring out who you are. And that's not an easy time. You're running around trying to meet a lot of people and try a lot of new things and find out what your thing is. By the time you're 40 and older, you've got it figured out, or you've got it figured out that you like to try new things and you're not insecure about it. You know who your people are. You've sloughed off all the superficial friends and replaced them with fewer but more meaningful connections. And in that case, we really end up not being bothered by keeping up with the Joneses in the same way. We're not bothered by people saying, hey, I'm not into what you're doing. You're like, oh, whatever, okay. And that's what shifts for us, that those things that bothered us when we were young because we weren't secure about who we were, it's
Yeah.
gone. And it's a really great, liberating, freeing feeling.
Yeah, I really like that. I resonate with that. And I think that, one of the things that you mentioned is, sort of the insecurity. I know that as I've gotten older, I've gotten more comfortable, right, with myself. The things that would have bothered me, oh, I lost my hair. When I was younger, it would have really affected me, and what can I do to get my hair back and stuff. And as I got a little bit older, I said, I kind of like it. It's me,
Yeah.
right? So you just become a little bit more comfortable and with your own quirks and all that kind of stuff. You know what you like, you know what you don't like, so you're able to self, select and sort. You're also not I mean, people are all at different stages at different ages, but for the most part, we're not all in that crazy like dating stage, or we're trying to like find somebody and then start a family and all that other stuff. That is either behind you or something you chose not to do or didn't, and so I think it's easier just to be able to focus on the things that you want to do, and also recognize, if you're reflective at all, some of the lessons you've learned throughout life. I mean, not everything in my life certainly has gone the way that I would have wanted it to, but when I look back on it, I can take things from it other than just
Yeah.
disappointment, other than just failure. I can say, well, geez, yeah, but there was a
Yeah.
lesson there. Look what happened 5 years later as a result,
Hmm.
right? And that's something that I wouldn't have been able to see at the time. I was just, oh, it didn't work out. It didn't work. So yeah, one thing I know about aging is that we definitely gain experience. I feel so much more wise and knowledgeable than I was, even with little things. I mean, I was not handy, couldn't do anything around the house. Like now I know how to do a lot of things that I just
Yeah.
sort of picked up over time. And it's crazy because I see myself giving my kids, lessons on these things. Oh, you got to do that and do, and I'm like, wow, I said that because I didn't, I had to learn that myself. Um, you know, One of the reasons I actually started this podcast is because for the last 17 years I was an entrepreneur and I did that sort of on my own, and I made a lot of mistakes along the way. And I said, looking back, I never really had a mentor. And one of the things that I always believed, and I've realized as I got older, is had I had that then, I would have been a lot more successful a lot sooner, a lot faster, with a lot fewer heartaches and headaches. And so I said, I want to be able to give that back to somebody else and say, listen, if you're out there and you're trying to build a business and you're feeling like it's lonely and it's difficult and all these other things, there's support there for you. There's people that have done this before, and it's super important. So talking about mentorship, what exactly is that, and what isn't it?
Well, I'll tell you that for sure. But I want to first say you did exactly what you should do developmentally in your lifespan. And that is that you hit the stage of generativity where you wanted to give back. So you just described generativity to a T. Um,
Oh,
and
awesome.
so that's an emotional developmental milestone where we're built to want to give back to others. That happens in midlife, and mentoring is part of that. So when we talk about generativity, that's caring for others without expecting anything in return. That's volunteering, mentoring, and philanthropy. So, mentoring is one where you're giving a piece of yourself to others. And that's what you're doing. It's a form of modern mentoring by doing your podcast. You're giving out information to others. You're not expecting them to pay you or do anything else. You're putting it out there to the people who want to accept your information and your skills. So, mentoring is something that if you're engaged in it, it requires two people. So it really is this, the description that I'm going to give is what makes a good mentor and mentee, and it's a definition as well. So you need generativity. You need somebody who's saying, I have something that I want to give back. I want to put it out into the world. Like you did when you said, I'm going to put out my info. I didn't have somebody doing this for me. I want to do this. You were compelled to do it. We all kind of do that in many different ways. Um, that requires that. And it also requires somebody who wants the information, right? So, like, I could just go giving out gifts all over the place and it could just end up sitting on the sidewalk, right? A little wrapped gift and nobody picks it up. Or I could be giving out gifts and people are receiving it. So, the fact that you have listeners means that people are receiving it. Um, the second thing we need is an intrinsic motivator. So you have to want to do it for no pay. You have to want, no awards, no accolades or anything of that sort. And this is where it gets tricky because a lot of times people will put it into workplaces, but it's a work requirement, whether it's, real or implied. And so if you're getting paid to mentor, you're not a mentor. So the kind of example I like to give is I ask my students, how many of you would like to go volunteer your time at a soup kitchen, giving out food and beverages to hungry, thirsty people? And they all raise their hands and they say, I would. And then I say, okay, great. Now, how many of you would go volunteer your time at Starbucks, giving out food and beverage to hungry, thirsty people? And they all say, no way would I want to do that, because there's a feeling that you should be getting paid, even though you're doing the same thing. So that feeling has to exist that you want to do it. You get that wonderful feeling that you get when you're doing something that you don't need pay for. The other thing is you need a meaningful connection. So it's like making friends. If you go and you meet somebody and you immediately click and you say, wow, I like that person. Well, you might meet somebody also that you just don't click with, even though they're a really cool, amazing person. That is not a failure. But if you don't click, that's not going to make mentorship really happen, because one person isn't going to be so receptive and the other one isn't going to be really willing to give. So there has to be a meaningful connection there. In terms of the next thing, you really need to have trust. So if you don't trust the person, you think, if I tell this person that I don't know something, they're going to fire me. Well, that is not going to make for a good mentoring relationship. Likewise, if you say, I'm not going to share this with this person because they're going to steal it from me and they're going to take my idea and run away with it. Again, not a good scenario. And finally, there has to be a goal. So if you're just meeting with somebody and chit-chatting, that's not mentoring. So really, the definition of mentoring is bringing all of those together. It's a comprehensive, meaningful relationship between two people with an exchange of information, values, skill, culture, something like that, that's being passed on to someone else.
Yeah, I really like that. I think because I do think the word is thrown around a lot
Yes.
in a lot of contexts, and I don't know that it's always applies to every situation. I'll tell you a funny story. I was in Scouts as a kid, and we had this older guy who had spent his whole life in Scouts, and he wanted so badly to just connect with the kids and share his wisdom and all these other things. And so he would print up these flyers, and it was things, all these sayings and all these things that he had sort of thought about his whole life, morals that he lived by, and all this other stuff. And his intentions were so great, and it used to break my heart because he'd come to these scout meetings and he'd hand out these flyers to all the kids. He got a bunch of these young teenage kids. And at the end of the meeting, everybody gets up and goes home. And there's a bunch of flyers scattered all over the floor. And, he'd walk around and sort of grumble because here's this poor guy. He's trying to say, listen, I have a life's long worth of experience and wisdom to share with you guys. But I think part of the challenge was that, like you said, everybody really liked him as a person, right? And everybody wanted to, and it's not even that we wouldn't listen, but people weren't interested in a flyer, a mass produced flyer. Like if you sat down and had a conversation with him, he was fascinating to
Yeah.
talk to. You'd learn a lot, and it was a really engaging thing. But when you're trying to hand out flyers, it's like you said, you have the gift on the sidewalk. People just walk right by it because there isn't that value attached to it in the same way because the relationship
Yes,
isn't there.
exactly.
And I think, yeah, that's super powerful, and I think really important. I know professionally for me, when I've had an opportunity to work with people that I felt had my best interest in heart. You know, we all have worked in an organization where our boss is supposed to be helping us,
Hmm.
but really you can tell that they only want you to be successful to a certain degree,
Yeah.
because after that it's threatening or whatever else. And
Yeah.
then I've had the people that I've worked with that were like, hey, stand on my shoulders, see what it looks like up
Yeah.
there. And I always, you don't forget that. Like, you always remember those people. They make a mark on you and make an impact in a way that that it does stay with you. So the power of that is definitely really visceral. So working across generations, how can we bring people together to be able to solve challenges? Because as we said, right, there's sometimes those biases or prejudgments about what older people or younger people think. So is there a good way to bridge that gap?
Yeah, I mean, we did that with the Mentor Project, which, we brought world-class experts who were saying, hey, we're leaving the workforce, some of them, and we don't have access to students, but we want to be able to give back. And I thought, wow, people would pay money to talk to you. How are you not able to connect with people? And it turns out there's just a big connection gap. So, one thing is that you can go out and you can do what we did, which is, we formed an organization to get mentors and mentees together around the world. But it's much simpler than that. You can go anywhere in your own community. Like you talked about scouting, that's a place. I mean, it's everywhere. You can go to a house of worship. You can go to any of the community areas that have the ability to get you connected with younger people. Volunteering in schools, any of those areas are great. Plus, if you're in the workplace, they usually have pro bono hours that they can say, hey, if you give a certain amount of time and you can mentor, you can do those kinds of things, you're able to do that. That's one way to bridge multi generations. The other thing, though, that most people don't realize is that there's something called lateral mentoring, and that's a term that I coined after working so long looking at and studying people who did real big tech things that were huge. I know nothing about tech. I went in and I got to really know a lot of the people who did some of the amazing tech things, like the guy who patented how we use credit cards on the internet, the guy who was one of the fathers of the
Oh,
firewall, like did major things that changed our world. And nobody did it in
yeah.
a vacuum. And nobody did it with a boss. And it wasn't a multi generational. It was a friend or a colleague who sat down next to them, or three offices down. In the case of the guy who was the father of the firewall, he used his wheelie chair and wheelied down to some guy, Steve, who helped him to create the network firewall. And then they wrote the first book on the network firewall. These sorts of things, you can have multi generational interactions. It's when you're looking for, and this is particular for entrepreneurs, if you're looking for something that you're starting and you need a skill, age does not matter to you. You are looking simply for the skill. So if you're a hardware engineer and you say, oh, I need a software engineer to make this happen, you're not going to care what the age of the person is. You're looking for that skill. So lateral mentoring is another way to do that, because when you're looking for skills and expertise in something very particular, you're going to look to your left and you're going to look to your right, and you're going to find that in your network or in a surrounding network. And I'm going to tell you, just 9 times out of 10, that ends up being a multi generational group of people that end up working together. And that's not in a hierarchical setting. Everybody's kind of just the same level, just in different areas, working generally in different silos, and they all come together to form some new idea or group.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think, one of the things you hit on in there too is it's the connection. It's the willingness to reach out. I think Steve Jobs said one of the things that he attributed his entire career and success to was just going out there and asking for what he wanted. When he knew the guy worked at Hewlett Packard and had all these junk parts, he said, I love to tinker. Called him up, hey, do you have any junk parts that I could play with? Right?
Yep.
And he said, if I don't make that phone call, maybe my whole career doesn't, and if he doesn't say yes, right, then maybe my whole career doesn't go the way that it went. Maybe, everything's changed. And so you just never know. But I think sometimes too, the irony of today's age is that we're digitally more connected than we've ever been, yet we have a harder time having conversations with each other and doing things face to face or reaching out and asking for help and these kinds of things because we aren't used to it. Everything's in like a few keystrokes and emojis and acronyms and stuff like that. And so I think it's easy sometimes to lose the value. And it's, again, I go back to the whole podcast idea and I go back to my entrepreneurial journey. So I did a lot of things online and we did software development and things like that. And I had worked with teams and stuff, but nobody was with me.
Yeah.
It was all through Skype. It was all through, and so people are all over the world. And even the people, my partners in my business, we would get together maybe once a year, maybe
Yeah.
twice a year at an event. And it's lonely, it's isolating. And one of the things that I regret the most is that I didn't make more connections along the way. I viewed progress as rolling up my sleeves and getting stuff done instead of building relationships. And I said, you know what, the relationships are secondary because they're getting in the way. I don't have time for this.
Yeah.
What I've got to do is get stuff done. The irony is, I had the whole thing upside down because if I had built the relationships first, everything else would have been so much easier and it would have been so much richer the whole way along. And I realized that as I got older, like you said, right? When would you have the opportunity to talk to somebody for free where you don't have to
Yeah.
pay them for their time? And one of the things I love about the podcast, I can have people like you come on. We can talk for, 30 minutes, 45 minutes in a great conversation that I might not otherwise ever be able to have with you. So I just think that that's fantastic. So tell us about the Mentor Project. I know you founded it. Can you share with us why you started it and what it's all about?
Sure. It was founded because it's called the Mentor Project. It was founded 5 years ago. We started before 5 years ago, but officially started 5 years ago as a company because I was talking to mentors, people who I was interviewing them to find out why would anybody want to mentor? What are the theories that are talked about in developmental psychology accurate? Is it really going to pan out if I talk to 45 people from grandmas to like a five-star general? Is it going to be the same? And it was. And the weird thing about it was that I kept running into people who were really unbelievable experts in their fields, super high level, and they didn't have anyone to mentor. So, Bill Cheswick, one of the fathers of the firewall, said, I can't, I'm getting ready to leave Bell Labs. I'm living on a farm. I can't go to a park and say, hey kid, do you want to learn quantum mechanics? Like it's gonna be weird. I can't do that. But strangely, what do you do if you're somebody at that level and you want to give back? And it's like burning down a library, right? It's like, oh my gosh, like it felt tragic. So we got a group of 10 people, like one woman from NASA, who worked on the mission of Mercury, Bill, several other people. And we started to go into schools. And people said to me, no one is ever going to volunteer to do this other than the group of people you have. And I was like, okay, well, we'll have fun. This will be great. It turned out they couldn't have been more wrong because within 6 months we had 60 people who volunteered, then 80, then 100. This organic idea turned into something that was unbelievable, like a train gone wild. So we now this year will probably hit about $3 million in mentorship hours that will have been donated. We're in about 5 countries. mentoring students around the world. We've reached more than 100,000 students. We're really proud of the work that we do for free. And so it really proves that people have a desire to give back. Once you hit midlife, you want to share your expertise. People just, it's been a quiet thing because people, nobody did it. Everyone looked at mentorship from the perspective of the mentee, not the mentor, who's been always a nameless, faceless individual out there that we were just supposed to go find, when they say go find a mentor. So we founded it. It's really thriving. Students do amazing things, from presenting research at conferences and in peer-reviewed journal articles, to patenting, to forming companies. They're really doing great things around the world. So we are just thrilled.
It's amazing. And so the people want the mentors want to come on just because they want to be able to share what they know and pass on the legacy and the information and the lessons they've learned and all of that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's essentially what
It's
it is.
simple.
Yeah.
It's that we're actually doing what we're built to do. And people who think about aging don't think of the emotional trajectory and how important it is. Imagine that you have all of your information and you sit there and it's like being Daffy Duck on a pile of riches and you're all by yourself, right? But the feeling of being irrelevant, that you've done stuff, you've been known for something, and you're suddenly irrelevant, that you're suddenly not useful, that you're suddenly not interesting to people, that is a really devastating place to be. And it's an easy free fix, that everybody wants to be connected, and it's easy.
That's it's an amazing point that you bring up there too, because I think that's one of the things that a lot of people get they misinterpret or they misunderstand. It's not just that when you get to retirement age, the idea is that you want to stop working because you know you have decided now it's time to go sit on the beach. You still want to feel relevant, you still want to feel important, and that there's value there. And I think, having a purpose matters. Like, you've got to replace it with giving back or doing some kind of hobby, or something else that keeps you so there was a convenience store chain that was founded around where I grew up, and it was called Dairy Mart. It was sort of like Cumberland Farms, or there's a bunch of different ones, but the guy started as a dairy farm, and it was one place, and they got fresh milk and stuff like that, and then he ended up growing it, and it ended up becoming these little convenience stores, and he grew it into I don't know how many of these convenience stores. So he retires, and he's much older. He's, I don't know, maybe in his 60s or even 70s, I think. Had an adult son, and in business that I had years ago, he was had an office in the same building that I was in. So I was talking to the building manager, and the building manager said, "Oh, do you know Charlie put in a bid to buy the building?" And I said, "Oh no, I didn't know that." He goes, "Well, do you know what he's worth?" And I said, "No, how would I know what he's worth?" He's like, 63 million. And he goes, "I only know that because he had to show me his balance sheet, and he had to show me all of his financials in order for us to accept the bid." And he goes, "So I said to him, Charlie, what are you doing working?" And Charlie looked at me and he goes, "How long do you think you can sit on the beaches of Fiji sipping Mai Tais before you get bored?" He goes, "I get to work with my son every single day, teach him a business, teach him how to be successful. I would pay money to do this, let alone," you know what I mean? So for him, that's what it was all about. And for him, it was family. So it was even better. But the idea is the same. Like, that's where the value is. He learned all these lessons from
Yeah.
all of that life experience. And now he had an opportunity to give that back. And I think, pass that on. I think that's fantastic. So, where can people find your products, services, connect with you?
Well, you can check out mentorproject.org, and look, any way that you want to support the Mentor Project is great. We are a 100% volunteer organization. You can find me at deborahheiser.com. I write for Psychology Today, so you can find my stuff there, and you can reach out to me there. And I wrote a book called The Mentorship Edge, so you can find me anywhere you buy books, and reach me there. So lots of different
All
places.
right. Per- Perfect. Thanks for that. So I have one last question I have to ask because I think it's really important and I love to hear what everyone's going to say. And that is, what's your number one tip for success as a business owner or an entrepreneur?
Look to your left and look to your right. You're most likely looking at your next mentor and maybe even your next mentee, but those people are usually the ones who are going to lift you up to have the most impact in your career.
That's awesome. Great advice, and I couldn't agree more. I've had those circumstances myself where I might not have even known it at the time, and then I look back, and those are the people that ended up helping me learn the things that I learn and become who I am. So, perfect. Thanks for that. All right, with that, it's just about time to wrap things up. I want to thank you again so much, Deborah, for sharing all your insights and great tips with us. Visit mentorproject.org to find out more about the Mentor Project or on the website and on LinkedIn. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, remember, no matter what you want from your business and your life, don't compromise, optimize.